What is most intriguing about this whole theme of having a Semite adapt Egyptian materials to a new context and use concerning Abraham of all things is that Joseph Smith's explanations make very good sense if they reflect this Jewish Egyptian redactor's understanding of the scene, and not a modern Egyptologist and not an ancient Egyptian. But what about the redactor himself? What is his understanding of these documents? Does Joseph Smith reflect the redactor's understanding in his explanations in the facsimiles? The answer is a startling yes. Page 123, Barney says, in Hebrew cosmology, the rakia, or the firmament, was said to be a solid dome supported by pillars. Now, the rakia, in turn, was closely associated with the celestial ocean, and that's what the rakia supported, was the actual celestial ocean. In the lower half of facsimile 1, we have the rakia. It's connected with the waters as with the celestial ocean. The second thing is it appears to be supported by pillars, exactly as the Semitic concept understands it. It was solid and therefore capable of serving itself as a support, in this case for the lion couch. The bottom half of facsimile number 1 would have looked to our Jewish Egyptian redactor very much like a microcosm of the universe, in much the same way that the divine throne chariot of Ezekiel 1 and 2 associates the four-faced fiery creatures with the rakia above their heads on which God sits enthroned. This is a microcosm of the entire universe. The Egyptian artist's perspective is not necessarily a limitation on this Jewish redactor. He doesn't have to stay with the original Egyptian context. He's building his own understanding and context in the explanations in this Egyptian picture, fitting it to this book of Abraham. The stacking effect of waters, apparently both being supported and acting as a support, would have suggested to our Jewish redactor the Hebrew conception of the rakia. And that's how Joseph Smith explains it. One of the remarkable aspects we have to keep in mind is that Joseph also took facsimile 2, figure 4. That's the mummiform hawk with outspread wings, and it's in a boat. He also said that that is a representation of the rakia. He specifically identified this, the figure answering to the Hebrew word rakiang, signifying expanse or the firmament of the heavens. Now, the reason this is so significant is because he also said it is a numerical figure in Egyptian signifying 1,000. Now, the book of Abraham itself uses two alternative English words to translate rakia. It uses the word firmament, which highlights its solidity, and it uses the word expanse. Have you ever noticed that before? This is significantly interesting. English expanse derives from the Latin expandere, to spread out. So what this translation highlights for us is the verbal root from which rakia derives, rakia, which means to spread out from beating, and from there simply to spread out. I would suggest that the Jewish Egyptian redactor, to him, this mummiform hawk in this ship with its outspread wings, you can go look at it, facsimile 2, figure 4, those outspread wings was a very natural representation of the rakia, which is spread out. From the modern Egyptologist explanation, This doesn't make a lot of sense. From the Jewish-Egyptian adaptation of an Egyptian figure to express the cosmology in his Book of Abraham, it's beautiful. There's another absolutely intriguing interpretation and explanation in our Book of Abraham that is explained really well with this theory of a Jewish redactor and an adaptation of an ancient Egyptian source with a Semitic meaning. And that is where in the Book of Abraham it says, to give you a feeling for this figure, for this explanation, I have put the figure in the beginning of the book, at the beginning of the record. With this idea, he says, as a transmission in antiquity, Kevin uses that. He reads the back references to facsimile number 1. This is at Abraham 1, 12b, and 14. These are glosses from the Jewish adapter. It's not Joseph Smith writing this, and it's not Abraham. It's the Jewish redactor who says, I refer you to the pictures at the beginning. That is the redactor's words. They're glosses that would have been added to the text only at the time it was first appended to a scroll containing the Book of Breathings. If, in fact, that's what happened. Now, Stephen Thompson says, the pronoun I in verse 12, I will refer you to the representation at the commencement of the record, Stephen Thompson says was written by Abraham. But with Kevin Barney's idea, if this is the Jewish redactor's words, here's why this is so significant. He says, if this argument is correct, and if this additional text was the Book of Abraham, my theory would explain why the redactor appended the Book of Abraham to a Book of Breathings. Because he meant to adopt the vignettes to the Book of Breathings as illustrations for the Book of Abraham. When the Egyptologists in 1967 translated the Joseph Smith Papyri, they did not translate into the Book of Abraham. So they said the Book of Abraham is phony. But the reason the Book of Abraham was put with the Book of Breathings was for the vignettes. In the Book of Abraham, that reading that says the back references to the commencement of this record and to the beginning, these were added in the story of the Book of Abraham to point the reader to the beginning of the scroll, not to the Book of Abraham. The Book of Abraham has not been found in the original papyri from 1967. We don't have it, unfortunately. But we do have the Book of Breathings that the Book of Abraham was attached to. And in the Book of Abraham, when it says, I will refer you to the commencement of the record for these illustrations, that is to the Book of Breathings. That's a fascinating explanation. That explains the disparity between the Book of Breathings and our Book of Abraham. When the Book of Breathings is translated, you don't get the Book of Abraham. You're not supposed to. That's not the Book of Abraham. That was on a separate scroll. This would also help explain why some of the Kirtland Egyptian papers shows attempts to match characters from the Book of Breathings to the finished English text of the Book of Abraham. Those involved in the exercise would have wrongly assumed that the Book of Abraham was the first text on the papyrus roll, whereas in reality it would have been the second text. That's fascinating. Now, with this explanation, we see the disparity between the papyri and the translation from modern Egyptologists doesn't matter. It is to the vignettes, the pictures, that the Book of Abraham was referring to on the first scroll. The Book of Abraham itself was the second scroll, and that's what we don't have.